All right, last lesson for this unit is the elements in the periodic table. And we need to talk about how the periodic table is arranged. First of all, it is arranged into rows and columns by their chemical properties. And the rows up and down, which is up and down, the vertical columns are called groups, or sometimes we refer to those as families. And that is up and down, vertical. Excuse me, the horizontal rows are called periods. Horizontal, side to side, just help you remember that. Now, the periodic table itself, the items on there can be considered one of three things. They're either going to be a metal, a nonmetal, or a metalloid. So let's discuss some of the properties that metals have. First and foremost, metals are very good conductors. And good conductors mean that they have the ability to conduct electric current or heat. We also consider metals to be shiny, or we call this having luster. So if you see that word luster, it basically just means shiny. Metals also have the ability to be hammered into a thin sheet, and we call this malleability. So I'm sure you've all seen aluminum foil that's very thin, so thin that you can tear it, and that's because it is a metal and it has the ability to be hammered into a thin sheet. And then they also have the ability to be pulled into a thin wire, and we call this being ductile. For instance, we have some copper wire showed here, which is often used in electrical work, but we also will sometimes have copper tubing that's used in air conditioning work. So again, they're conductors. They have luster, which means shiny. They're malleable, or have the ability to be hammered into a thin sheet, and they are also ductile, which means they can be pulled into a thin wire. As you would expect, nonmetals have completely different properties than metals. They are poor conductors, which means they will not conduct the electric current or heat. They are very brittle, which means that they break easily, and many of them are gases at room temperature. Things like oxygen and nitrogen, which you see here, are gases, and those are some of the nonmetals. And metalloids have characteristics of both metals and nonmetals. They are solids at room temperature, and some of them are used as semiconductors. And what a semiconductor is it will conduct a weak electric current, and that's why it's very useful in electronics. Here I'm showing silicon, and I don't know if some of you have ever heard of part of California being referred to as Silicon Valley, and that's because that's where a lot of the computer chips are made for your electronics, your iPads, your phones, that sort of thing. And the reason it is referred to as Silicon Valley is because silicon is what is actually used in those chips that they put in the electronic devices. Okay, so now we're going to label the periodic table so we know where some of these things are. First of all, let's start with the up and down. Remember we said vertical up and down, we call these the groups. Okay, and if you look across, the groups going up and down, there's 1 all the way down here through 18. So there's 1 through 18 groups. From the bottom, we're going to draw our horizontal line, and that's where we have our periods. So that means everything that goes side to side, like through here, are periods. Okay, and if you notice, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 periods. So you can kind of remember it like this. Just like school, the periodic table has 7 periods. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is where are the metals and where are the nonmetals and where are the metalloids. So the best way to do this, and some periodic tables will have these on there and some won't, so we are going to actually draw ours on there, and that is this zigzag line. So if you start with boron, and notice I'm making it a little bit thicker so you can see it. If you start with boron and go down, everything that touches the zigzag line are metalloids. It has to touch the line to be a metalloids. Now, except aluminum, that's the one exception. except aluminum. Aluminum is actually a metal. And think about aluminum foil. It definitely conducts heat. It's definitely shiny, definitely malleable. It's a very thin sheet. So aluminum is the exception to that metalloid. Now, so the metals are all the way on the left side. Everything to the left of that zigzag line is a metal, except hydrogen. Okay, except hydrogen. Hydrogen is actually a gas. Okay, so we're gonna just say except hydrogen. Okay, and then everything on the right side of that zigzag line are the nonmetals. Running out of room here, sorry. As you can see by looking at the table, there are a whole lot of metals compared to the metalloids and the nonmetals. Okay, and remember we said the metalloids are some of the semiconductors. Okay, and then we want to talk about group 18 down here is an important group. Okay, this is called the noble gases. And what's important to remember about the noble gases is that they are very unreactive. Okay, they do not participate in hardly any reactions at all. Okay, so they're very unreactive. And then the last thing I just kind of want you to make note of is just kind of be interested in is we have only two, let's see if you can see that, two elements that are actually liquids at room temperature. Okay, so two liquids on the periodic table, that's it. Okay, and then for gases, we have only actually 11 gases, okay? So there's 11 gases, and we're going to color those in. There's hydrogen, so there's hydrogen. There's nitrogen, just going to make a little mark, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, and then all of the noble gases, and those are all gases. So there's 11 gases, 2 liquids, and the rest are solids. So obviously, the vast majority of the elements are, in fact, solids. Okay, since this is my very first flipped lesson that I've ever done, I'm going to end this lesson with a joke, a periodic table joke to be exact. So it goes like this. Oxygen and potassium went on a date. It went okay. Then oxygen went on a date with magnesium, and I was like, OMG. All right, see you in class.